are we ready to implement a hiring freeze? And to me, that really is dependent on whether or not we have the community safety alternatives and programs in place to be able to respond to people who are in crisis.
And that's Seattle City Council President Lorena Gonzalez breaking it down on a phrase that's raised a few arguments here in the past week regarding the Seattle Police Department, a hiring freeze. Well, we're going to crank up the heat on that issue and a whole lot more here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm also a host on Seattle Channel. The views expressed here are my own. Joining me, he was frozen in carbonite, but we thawed him out before the show, and he's ready to make this happen. It's Kevin Schofield from Seattle City Council Insight. Hello, Kevin.
I'm doing okay. I've got a little bit of blindness from being frozen carbonite, but
it happens when you mess with Java.
Give me a half an hour into a phaser rifle, and I'll be all set.
Totally, I hear you. Thanks also to City Grind Espresso, the background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. It's the coffee stand on the first floor of City Hall, closed, of course, during the pandemic. Hang in there, John and Charlie. A big thanks also to our patrons who support us on Patreon. We continue to need your help, folks, as we provide this service here with this podcast on every week. We're on episode 47. Very proud of this, and thanks to you for doing that. Please do consider helping, even if it is just a few bucks a month. Seattle News, Views, and Brews on Patreon. And finally, thanks to Converge Media for airing the video version of this podcast Wednesday nights at 6 o'clock. Let's get going with right here, right now. All right, so Kevin, I'm calling this the budget stick a fork in it edition because I think we're just about done here. It's the week of Thanksgiving. Here we are, and I am thankful that the council is going to finally approve its 2021 budget after such a tumultuous year. I want to try to tackle the SPD and what's going on there first. I mentioned off the top of the show the consternation over the idea of a hiring freeze for the SPD. Councilmember Sawant, Morales, and a lot of No New Cops advocates were hoping to pull back $9 million from the SPD's recruiting fund. The council did not end up doing that. So kind of with the dust settling here, Kevin, the council did make some cuts to the SPD, but allowed for some new officers too to come in. Give me your overview of the council and the SPD budget here going into 2021.
Yeah, so just in terms, remembering first of all that the vast majority of SPD budget is personnel expenses.
That's right.
Salaries and overtime. It's not equipment and other stuff.
Last
like that.
balls, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's not that, right? It's really all about salaries. That's like more than 80% of the budget.
Yep.
So the SPD has had higher than usual attrition this year, right?
That's right.
And so they're actually they've never, other than a very brief period of time at the beginning of this year, they've never in many years, probably at least a decade, ever managed to actually be fully staffed, right? They've always had sort of more what they call hiring authority to be able to hire more people than they've been able to fill, right? Because they have attrition like every other organization every year for a whole variety of reasons.
Yes.
And they have this really long pipeline for hiring new people, right? Because they got to get a recruiting class in, they've got to
train those people.
Checks, they've got to, do all this testing for them. And then they go through training at the academy, and all that stuff. So it's about a year for their pipeline. So and it's interesting
from hiring to get them on the force.
So now looking at 2021, they basically know how many people they can be able to hire next year and bring on as new officers, because they've been, doing that whole process, that whole pipeline this year. They know how many people they have the pipeline that tells them next year. And so, they have an updated notion of attrition next year, which may or may not be right.
Right.
But, that tells them, okay, here's how many people we think we can bring on next year. Right. But because this higher than expected attrition this year, they're actually, not only not fully staffed, but well below where they expected to be this year.
Right.
On the hiring plan going into this year. Right. And next year, given what they think they think, at best, they're going to be able to sort of add back 25, which won't get them even close to where they are this year.
Right. In terms of numbers. Yeah.
Right. So they're overall going to be down. And so, the question isn't, is SPD going to grow?
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
Because they're already way down below where they should be. Nobody's talking about growing it. The question is just simply, do they get to hire people back to replace attrition that they have?
Yeah.
Right. And a little bit of attrition they've had this year. So what the council did and approved in their budget this year is to say, well, based upon your plan, you think next year you can get to basically 1,311.
Right. Yep.
Hire fully, trained officers on the beat.
Mm-hmm.
We will fund you for that.
Yes.
And not a single person more.
And nothing beyond that.
And we're
which has
going to
been an
take
issue
all
in
the
past
money
years.
back they'd be using
Mm-hmm.
to pay officers beyond that. And we're going to set your position authority at 1311. So
Mm-hmm.
you can't go below that. But then there's this question of a hiring freeze to say,
Yeah.
well, if attrition ends up being higher than
Yeah.
that, do they get to hire people back?
Right.
And Councilmember Sawant said, no, I don't think they should. Councilmember Morales largely agreed with him. And
Yeah.
the other 7 council members said, nah, that
Yeah.
doesn't seem like such a great idea. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that, well, actually, first of all, it's not even legally clear that the council can impose
Limit.
a hiring freeze,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we do have, separation of powers in different, sections of this government, right?
Yep.
And the mayor is a duly elected leader of the executive branch, right?
Right. Right.
The council's power is to set the budget.
Yeah.
They can say, you can hire this many people,
Mm-hmm.
here's the money that you have to pay them. And they can change
Right.
that anytime they want.
Yep.
But it's not clear they can say hiring freeze on you.
Yeah. Right. Well,
To something executive branch. But then there's larger questions too, because
Okay.
the city charter also makes clear that the chief of police, Chief
Mhm.
Diaz,
Yep.
actually has control of how to deploy those
That's right.
resources,
Mhm.
right? How many go on patrol, how many go on investigative units.
Yep.
And a couple months back, he already moved 100 officers from investigative units,
Mhm.
which also do really, really important work, over to
Yep.
patrol,
Right.
because he really wanted to keep the 911 response numbers low.
Right.
To
Wanted
something
to
that
keep more
thought
people
was
on
reasonable.
patrol. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you call 911, you get somebody there pretty fast.
Right. Right.
And what he's now saying is, the people that are left in the investigative units,
Mhm.
a lot of them have been there for like a decade.
Yeah. Right.
So, I'm getting down to the bottom of the barrel of how many people I can just move from those
Mhm.
units back over to patrol.
Right.
So things get really, really hard from
Yeah.
here. And some of the council members, in particular Councilmember Herbold, who chairs the
Mhm.
Public Safety Committee
Right.
for the council, has said, yeah, this investigative units, they're pretty important too.
Yeah.
We don't want to dry those up. And Chief
Mhm.
Diaz does get to say how to deploy these resources here.
That's right.
So I'm really not comfortable at this point with going further down. And then
Yeah.
there's also this larger issue of, they're putting a lot of money into community investments, but those
Mhm.
community investments in the organizations that everyone hopes will take over responsibility from the
Mhm.
police aren't stood up yet.
I was
not
going
at
to say,
scale where
we
they
don't
can
know
do
what
that.
impact they're going to have and what they're going to do. That's a huge part of this.
Yeah. So I think, majority of the council members are saying, let's wait until that's stood up. And then
Mhm.
once we know that we have that capacity and what it's
Mhm.
capable of doing,
Right.
that tells us what to do with the police department numbers.
Right. Right. It's one of those situations where we heard it over the course of the summer. So many different council members, more than a super majority of them said, let's consider defunding the police by 50%. That number has gotten closer to, I guess, 17%. But
It's about 20. Let's call
yeah,
it about
okay,
20.
closer to 20%. Just in looking at that, I just don't know. That whole concept of it's a plan, not a number here. I think while you may have heard that from Councilmember Juarez, whatever else on the council earlier on, I feel like more council members are starting to come in line with that to try to put together something. I've heard it from Councilmember Mosqueda too, the budget chair here. She's talking about right sizing the police department, which feels like, okay, if we're putting all this extra money in there for people that the police department isn't even hiring, that makes sense. Like any other department, you would
totally
want to
makes
right
sense.
size it. I mean, that's what we're talking
And they
about
can
here.
use that money for other things. There's no reason
Yeah.
to have that sitting in the SPD budget when nobody's going to use it.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. I wanted to make sure we touched also on homeless investments. And this was an interesting one that we've touched on during the podcast here. In the scheme of a $6 billion plus budget, $800,000 might not seem like a lot, but that's the amount behind a potential win, if you want to call it that, for Councilmember Sawant, pushing for more of these self-managed tiny home villages. And Kevin, in talking about this, Share Wheel, Nicholsville, the mayor I know has been at odds with those kind of self-run groups there for these tiny home villages. What does it mean and what does it look like to have these providers in the mix now a little bit more when it comes to providing tiny house villages?
Yeah. So, the term self-managed
Yeah.
is really vague. And,
Yes.
and the council
What does
got
it
into
mean?
this a little bit
Yep.
when they were talking about this in their budget deliberations this week.
Yeah.
Every single one of the tiny home villages will tell you at some level or another, they feel like they're self-managed.
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But, some are more self-managed than others.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's an organization that's been doing management of a lot of the logistics and case management and other things for these camps called Lehigh,
Low Income Housing
Institute.
Institute. Yep.
Right. And For some of these organizations, they're actually what's called the fiscal agent. They're
Yes,
the
right.
official 501c3 nonprofit that can take funding from the city and go spend it, right?
Yep.
And this is an area that Share Wheel got in trouble with, pretty big time several years back.
Yes.
Where it was clear that they were not doing good accounting, and they were not tracking all the money and funding they were getting and all this. And this is prior to Durkin, but they basically were going to get defunded. And then there was, one more Share Wheel crisis in the city.
Yeah.
And they ended up, Lehigh jumped in and said, I'm sorry, Catholic Community Services.
Yes, CCS was there,
and
right.
said, CCS came in and said, we will be their fiscal agent, right? So that city funding can go to them, and they'll oversee to make sure everything's done right in how the money is spent and accounted for and everything like that, right?
Yeah.
So, Share Wheel, the funny thing in this budget amendment that Councilmember Sawant put in is there's language in that says the city should be creative in finding a way to be able to fund Share Wheel directly, right? Because they can't, right?
Yeah, right.
The city government actually has to have a responsible fiscal agent who can take this money, and Share Wheel, has refused. And Lehigh, Share Wheel and Lehigh do not work well together, right?
Yeah.
And Lehigh is said, no, we're not. We got to handle this. And Share Wheel and their camps, at least one of them, have refused to have case management.
Right.
On site, right.
That's
which is also
that South Lake Union site had a lot of issues there. Yeah.
Because case management has turned out to really be the pivotal factor as to whether people move out of these camps and into permanent housing.
Yeah, it's not just a place to stay; it's the services that go with it, of course.
And so, but that's really kind of a point of tension for a couple of these self-managed camps.
Yeah,
are they really kind of a waypoint on the way to permanent housing, or are they really long-term shelter and long-term housing for these folks? And in some ways, it really seems like it's more of the people organizing it and staying in these camps, not all the camps, but just a couple of them, really seem to be sending signals that they think that this is permanent housing or these very long-term housing for them, including refusing case management.
Right. This is definitely something that we're going to watch next year as well. But I wanted to make sure I touched on one more piece, a tweak to the budget that came relatively late in the game. We're going to talk about bridge maintenance right now. West Seattle Bridge, got that in a minute here. But I want to talk about overall bridge maintenance. So the council, as they're allowed to do under the Seattle Transportation Benefit District that voters just passed, and because I-976 has been thrown out, they're putting in place a $20 car tab fee to replace the city's $60 fee that's expiring next year. Councilmember Peterson says, put this into bridge maintenance. But critics say, wait a minute, this is money we should be using for transit, bikes, other options, things like that. Kevin, in terms of where the council settled on this, they're going to take in this fee, I believe, but in terms of where it goes, still needs some study. Sounds like some more process on the way.
They're going to run a 3-month, it was originally going to be 6 months, but a 3-month stakeholder input process to decide this. And I would just say, so today, by the industry standards, the city should be spending somewhere between $34 and $100 million a year on bridge maintenance. And this year, 2020, they spent $8.
Right.
And with other additions that between the mayor and Councilmember Peterson sort of squeezing in there, they were going to get to about 12. This would have brought it up to 15 and a half next year. So maybe half of what they the bare minimum what they should be spending. But the bigger takeaway from this is, why do you think we spend so little on bridge maintenance? Right? It's because when you put it in front of a bunch of people, and particularly stakeholders, there's always sexier things to do.
Absolutely. Maintenance always falls to the bottom of the list.
There's never going to be an advocacy group showing up at city council meetings wearing colorful t-shirts.
We want maintenance.
Saying, bridge maintenance, bridge maintenance. There's going to be no posters and no rallies and no colorful t-shirts.
It's a tough rhyme with maintenance, but keep going.
But, they have a city audit report saying, hey, you guys are dramatically, critically underfunding this. It just, I don't really just rant about the council, but this is exactly how we got in this situation. Dramatically underfunding it. They have an auditor report saying you're dramatically underfunding bridge maintenance, and they almost started to fix it. and then fell right back into the same pattern.
Yeah.
How did you create this problem?
Yeah.
Right back in the middle. It's like you almost put money into bridge maintenance, but no. And and the reason they did this is because people, advocacy groups that they're listening to came to them and said, hey, we have other ideas about how
we need this instead.
Money. So the chances of coming out of this with them saying, yeah, let's put all the money into bridge maintenance, right, is just $3.6 million for next year, about 7.2, but it was really only commitment for kind of 1 year.
Yeah.
It's just the chance of it $3.6 million going to bridge maintenance is exactly zero. It's just not going to happen. Right?
That's going to be an interesting process to watch there. We're going to keep on talking bridges as we move on to our next segment. Now hear this. All right, so it's the time we select that soundbite of the week, listen to it and pick it apart. Here's one from Mayor Jenny Durkin at a virtual press conference last week, where she talked about going with a repair option, not a replacement for the West Seattle Bridge. Here's what she said.
Each of the options has risk. We wanted to make sure that looking at the options, we used the lens to determine what had the greatest amount of certainty to restore mobility in a reasonable time frame at a cost where funding was obtainable.
Kevin, you've been reporting on this for Seattle City Council Insight for several months here. I think this is the call you were really thinking the city was going to make at the end of the day.
Called it 2 weeks ago. Yeah.
Nailed it.
I read the cost-benefit analysis, and it was really clear that repair option was the way to go. And
as much as SDOT was really pushing the replacement thing, we could all see that.
Yeah. And I think everybody had really high hopes for this rapid replacement.
Yes.
They could get by mid 2023,
sure,
a new bridge span up there.
But
then when they really looked into it, they found out that, first of all, it looks like federal transportation infrastructure funding isn't going to come up, in front of Congress until late next year.
Right.
There's a year, right? Yeah. Because it would take somewhere between $400 and $500 million to build this thing.
Pramila Jayapal is talking about it, by the way. She put out a press release recently and said there's some money there, but you're right, the process takes a while.
And then there's permitting, right?
Yep.
And the
that's
permitting,
the
when you compare it to other ones, maybe it's a year.
Yeah.
Right? But it's arguably could be years because, not only do they have, it's a federal waterway, right? It's a Superfund site.
You got the tribes involved.
It's the port is there. You got the tribes involved. You've got state, environmental regulations. Sure. It's a salmon waterway.
Yeah.
It's just like, it's going to be years.
Yeah.
If to do a major kind of construction project like that, it's going to be years. And so realistically, when it got down and people looked at it, they said, this rapid replace thing really doesn't look rapid replace. And by the way, just coming back to the funding, we can't actually, the reason one of the reasons it was going to be rapid replace is they could go build that bridge span, the replacement one, somewhere else
while they're
demolishing the existing one, but they can't start demolishing the new one, the old one, until they have the funding secured.
Yeah,
of course. Until they find $400 to $500 million, right, and have it really secured, they can't start demolition, right? That really, all that together says, mid 2023, there's not a chance that's going to happen.
Yeah, so it's looking like the repair will be online closer to 2022, maybe even faster than that. I know there's been some...
2022, they're going to try to shave a little bit more time off that if they can.
We'll see. As a West Seattle resident, I certainly hope so. But I wanted to make sure I touched on the other piece of this, the Sound Transit element here. I know Mayor Durkin is talking about collaborating with Sound Transit. Let's design and build this new crossing by the early 2030s that's got light rail, freight, bikes, things like that. This sounded like a whole new span, and that's another huge project. Maybe that's where the federal dollars come in here. That's still a bit of a question mark here, it feels like to me.
Yeah, we'll see. So, assuming the repair goes well, 40 years from now, we'll need a new span there. But in the meantime, light rail is supposed to go to West Seattle, right?
Right.
And they've, of course, been looking at, do we dig a tunnel?
Yeah.
Do we put a new
Mm-hmm.
span over, something like this? And what Mary Durkin said was, we've already had some conversations with Sound Transit. And of course, they've got lots of, funding, some federal funding and, regional funding coming in to pay for those projects. But we could potentially collaborate with them on a multimodal bridge, a new multimodal span, not a replacement for this bridge, but a new third thing, which would give us more redundancy, but, would do light rail and maybe bike and pedestrian too.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And, Mayor Durkin said several times in talking about, her decision around this, that, at this point, nobody sees the point in building a bridge that only does one thing.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah,
right. So she's pretty hot on this idea of like, let's get a third span across there that, work with Sound Transit, do light rail, see if we can get some more pedestrian and bicycle, and that way, we will have more redundancy.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. That's the whole next piece with that one. I wanted to touch on one more thing here, just in looking at some of the things that have been happening over the past week with regard to business in our state and in our area here. I saw an interesting piece, I know you did too, Kevin, from Danny Westneat in the Seattle Times here, talking about Governor Inslee getting an A in health, but gets marked absent when it comes to the pandemic economy. So many businesses, restaurants especially, I'm thinking about, shut down over this past week. But where's that financial support they need to stay alive here at the end of the year? The state doesn't have its act completely together there when it comes to getting this aid out. And I think that's going to lead to some concerns this winter time.
Yeah. And it's a tough thing. The city and the state have the same constraint, which is they're required to have a balanced budget.
That's right.
Right. They can't deficit spend.
Yeah.
The only government that can deficit spend is the federal government.
Yeah. Right.
So the federal government can come in with, a COVID relief
stimulus, whatever. Yeah. And I know state and local people have been saying we need that. Sure.
But at this point, if the state's going to show up with more relief, the city's done a little bit, the state has done a little bit too. But if they're going to show up with more, they basically have to cut something else.
Yeah. Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So there has been this debate over whether the governor should call a special session of the state legislature to go look at this issue and see if they can come up with a relief package.
Yeah.
And, it's not clear the state legislature wants to go do that, because I don't think they want to be put on the spot to try to come up with something when there isn't a pile of money sitting around right now.
Yeah, there have been some budget forecasts for the state that look a little bit better, but
a little bit better.
Yeah, it really does take that extra special session potentially to push it over the top. But maybe Jay Inslee is hoping that the Biden presidency, when that glorious day comes here and President Trump actually concedes, but when that happens, maybe there will be some more willingness from the feds to have a stimulus program going on that'll help everybody during this time. I guess that's the point from Inslee there.
I think I think
part of it, at least.
Inslee probably believes either way the federal government will eventually get a COVID relief package.
The timing of it
through, but yeah, I mean, I think he's assuming that relations between Washington State and Seattle will be better with a Biden government than they are with the Trump government. Yeah, it can't. Right. So yeah, but I think that's easy. But again, there aren't piles of money sitting around the state waiting to be spent on this right now. So they're really in a tough spot.
Indeed they are. All right, we're going to move on to our final segment. What's next? Okay, so Kevin, you've been tracking the latest developments in the Shama Sawant recall campaign, the council member there from District 3 here in Seattle. So you got Recall Sawant and the Sawant Solidarity groups going at it, and already raising some big money. This is even before the court has decided whether this can actually go forward at all. And I just wanted to get your take on this. These two camps really starting to build up some war chests here from the sound of it.
Yeah. So the Sawant campaign's raised about $95,000 so far. They spent about $35,000 of that on a variety of things, mostly payroll. They like hiring people and having their own staff, and it's largely socialist alternative folks. So it's kind of a jobs program, and you could kind of look at both, Councilmember Sawant's, re-election campaign last year, and that Tax Amazon campaign is kind of they're serially doing these, even if there wasn't a recall campaign, you can imagine Socialist Alternative probably would have come up with some kind of new initiative after the Tax Amazon one to be able to run a campaign, because they've got a pretty good fundraising machine that they can pull together now. The Recall Sawant campaigns raised about $180,000.
Right.
It's like an enormous amount of money.
It's a lot.
But unlike Sawant, they have to pay their own legal bills.
Yeah, right. Because the city's covering Sawant.
City is covering Sawant. That's, we don't know how much I guess, I'll at some point do a public document request and see how much they're actually covering.
Spending on that. Yeah.
But we know for the recall campaign, they've paid about $50,000 so far, and they've got another 17. I think they paid $55,000 so far, and they got another $17,000 that they owe. And they've got the cash to cover it. It's just accounts net 30-day.
Yeah, and you got Davis Wright Tremaine on that representation side.
Right.
That doesn't come
so
cheap.
they got about $70,000 so far of legal bills on us, and they're getting near the end of this, right? But there's a lot there. But just their fundraising is very different because so much of it is small donations, right? They have a lot more donors. They have about 3,500 donors, whereas the Shama Solidarity Campaign's got about 1,000 so far.
Yeah, and just to jump in here, I know we kind of talked about this a few months ago, I guess you'd say, when Shama Sawant was running for re-election in the fall and was able to be elected. It seemed like during that campaign, it was a bunch of big money. You had Amazon, you had the Chamber of Commerce, whatever else as the opponent there. And then you've got the Shama group here. It looks like the Shama Sawant group is kind of working from the same playbook, but maybe this recall effort is not trying that big business angle as much anymore. That's the dynamic I'm seeing here.
Yeah, so for a campaign like this, the limit is $1,000.
Right.
And maybe once this, gets going, that, PACs show up again and start spending a lot of money. We'll see.
Right.
It's not like the campaign isn't allowed to coordinate with them. So,
right.
But the limit of any donation right now to the recall campaign is $1,000.
Yeah.
The recall campaign has had 3 of those so far,
right?
And in that $180,000 they've raised, 3 were max $1,000 donations.
So they're getting a lot of that smaller stuff.
As opposed to the Shama Solidarity Campaign that's had $33,000 donations right now, which is, it's about a third of what they've raised altogether has been like 33 people, maxing out their donation. Right.
Wow. Okay. That's something that we're going to be tracking well into next year. I know that January 7th, we're expecting to hear something from the Supreme Court on that one. So,
January 7th.
Yeah. Right around the corner on that one. All right. Well, you know what, folks, one of the joys of our Coffee Break podcast, that special treat that you're going to have with that cup of coffee. And Kevin, just a little slice of it here. Maybe I can show it to you. This is, just a little nubbin of pumpkin bread. One of my favorite
left, right?
Well, yes, I got to say that I always keep the heel for myself, though. I'm that guy. I really like the heel of the bread here. But Susan, the wonderful producer I work with at Seattle Channel, made some pumpkin bread, wrapped it up, and said, "I'm thankful for you." And I was like, "Oh." But I'm always thankful for her. In terms of the right pumpkin bread, Kevin, how do you do it? Get the right sponginess there, the right texture. What's your secret, my man?
Oh, pumpkin bread.
Ooh, I'm always putting Kevin on the spot here, folks, by the way. And we just need to lean on his baking mastery. So what do you got there?
I'm not sure it's one thing for pumpkin bread. I mean, you got to get the baking temperature and the time right, so you don't dry it out, right? I think a lot of pumpkin bread is getting the spices right. How much cinnamon, how much nutmeg, what's the right mix of that. Yeah. To me, pumpkin bread is getting sort of the texture and the moisture right is important, but to me, it's about the flavor and the taste too, right?
Indeed.
Because pumpkin itself is not really that flavorful.
No, it's not.
It's really the nutmeg and cinnamon and whatever other spices you just
gotta have the special herbs and spices. I hear you.
Yeah, it's the special herbs and spices.
This is the good stuff here. And Kevin, I am also thankful for you, sir. I'm really glad that we're able to put this show together.
And I'm thankful for you. Thank you for all your hard work on this.
No, back at you. Well, guess what, folks? The next time you want to know what's happening in local politics, give us a listen here on Seattle News, Views, and Brews. Find out what's brewing. You can subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, and please do support us on Patreon. If you like what you're hearing, we could use that help there for sure. And thanks also for watching on Converge Media 2. We will see you soon. Thank you. Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2020.